Hi, this is Mr. Roboto, and it's moving week. Moving week is what I call week 4. Week 4 is when you figure out whether or not the draft that you had was any good or not. So, without further ado, let's go to RoboCheat and see how things look. Now, the things that you want to focus on during moving week are who are the players that are underperforming, who should you target for the latter half of the season after week 4. And you can figure out who are the underperforming players by coming to RoboCheat and taking a quick look. So let's zoom in. So here we got the top running backs from week 4 through the end of the season. And you can see Arian Foster is at the top of the list. So no one's going to be very excited about Arian Foster at this point. You can see his ADP is 18 now. That was in the top 10 at the beginning of the season. So people are not excited about Arian Foster. So consequently, Robo sees Arian as a buy low. And that's what this delta column is all about. That's the difference between the ADP and the RDP. RDP is what Robo thinks of Arian Foster, and ADP is what the world thinks of Arian Foster, and you can see there's a big delta, 17. So what does that mean for you? That means that you can go talk to the Arian Foster owner and make a deal for Arian Foster. You can probably get Arian Foster for a mid-round second or third pick that has performed normally. So other than that, if you take a closer look at the other players, at the chart in general, you'll see that there are two large groups, tiers of players. The top group being right here, Arian Foster, Marshawn Lynch, LaShawn McCoy. These players are going to be in your top tier for the rest of the season. Now, CJ Spiller is injured right now, and you can see his ADP shows it. He is at 58, and that's a huge delta. But Robo thinks that from now to the end of the season, he'll perform at least as well as these other running backs in the top tier. So obviously you don't have to pay for that. You don't have to give trade value for that, because the perception of CJ is so low. His ADP is 58. There's a huge 50-point delta between what Robo thinks of CJ and what people think of CJ. So you can go after CJ and probably get him at a very low price, and you'll be happy with him if you think that this injury that he's having is not going to be a problem. So now would be a great time to go after CJ Spiller, and come time for your fantasy playoffs, you'll have a great player, and you'll probably be able to get CJ for, once again, a low second round, third round, perhaps even lower right now, because CJ Spiller owners are pretty frustrated. They'd like to get some value for him. He hasn't performed very well so far. So there's great upside potential there. There's the potential for CJ and Arian Foster to be bought low, and then later on in the season, when they finally achieve their potential, they can carry you through the fantasy playoffs. Now these other players in the top tier, Marshawn, Adrian, and LaShawn McCoy, there's no big delta here, so you're probably not going to be able to pick up those players and buy them low. And they certainly aren't available on waivers. None of these players that you see here are going to be available on waivers. Some interesting names in the second tier that probably could be traded for. Just take a look down the delta column and look for big deltas. Lamar Miller, Noshawn Moreno, David Wilson, Stephen Ridley. These are players who've been underperforming or who are new in Lamar Miller's case. And you can pick them up, and hopefully they'll start to either achieve their potential or achieve the potential that is in the position for the new player, Lamar Miller. So let's take a look at the quarterbacks now. Now, in general, quarterbacks, let's zoom in on the top tier. Now, there's somebody that we didn't see at the beginning of the season. At the top of the list, Peyton Manning. Peyton Manning is a huge story this fantasy year, and so his ADP shows it. His ADP is now up to 7. He's in the top 10 draft picks if the drafts were held today. And Robo also recognizes this new value that Peyton has, given his performance in the first 4 games, and has him as the 3rd best player overall. So that's a huge opportunity right there it's a huge jump for Peyton Manning, I should say. There's not a real opportunity there for you. The opportunities are where you see a big green delta, or in the case of Drew Brees, a big red delta, and you have to treat these differently. So with quarterbacks, you have to, when you take a look at the list, it's similar to running backs. You've got a big group in this second tier and just a few players up in the top tier. So if I zoom in here again and take a look at, we see that Cam Newton has fallen out of favor. He was in the top tier at the beginning of the year, and he's dropped out. Now, that's due to his poor performance, and his ADP has dropped way down. So he has a huge delta. So Robo thinks that in the latter half of the season, and leading up to your fantasy playoffs, Cam's going to start performing well. In other words, there hasn't been sufficient amount of proof that Cam isn't a top tier quarterback. Well, there's sufficient amount that he's not top tier, but not that he's dropped into the second tier. But the hate is just getting too much for Cam. His ADP at 61, when his RDP is at 9, a huge delta at 57. You can get Cam Newton for a song right now. If you go talk to the owner of Cam, you can probably pick Cam up for very little value in return. So in general, as I was saying earlier, quarterbacks have larger deltas, and that's because fantasy players tend to focus on getting running backs, and so as a group, running backs tend to be overvalued, quarterbacks are undervalued. So in general, all these players are undervalued. But in the group, the most undervalued are Eli and Cam. And so that would be who you should target for trades. You'll be able to pick them up and most likely come out on the better end of the trade. I see Phillip Rivers has jumped up into a 3rd tier. He's had a nice beginning of the season, but his delta isn't quite as high as Eli and Cam. And so you want to focus on those 2 players when you go after trades. Let's take a look at the wide receivers now. All right, well, I think this was something that Robo predicted. Jordy Nelson, he was listed as the number 1 wide receiver, and everyone was going after Randall Cobb, who was listed as the number 2 wide receiver. So Robo gave you correct guidance for Jordy Nelson, and now he's jumped up into his own tier. He's the number 1 wide receiver on the most prolific passing offense, except for maybe Denver. So he still doesn't really, his ADP doesn't reflect his value. ADP is just 26. so that's not so hot. People don't perceive him to be that great. So there's a big delta. So you can probably pick up Jordy Nelson for little value. You can also pick up Roddy White. There's a huge delta here with Roddy. 158. Now Roddy White has had an absolutely terrible beginning to the season. So the Roddy White owners would be more than happy to trade away Roddy White. His ADP is 175. So now the Roddy White owner knows that, yeah, he's had a terrible time with him, but now he's almost over his injury and he's thinking, do I hold on to him or do I just dump him now? And if you offer a reasonable trade, obviously Roddy White is going to have better days. If you offer a reasonable trade, you should be able to pick up Roddy White, and now is the time to do it, because once Roddy has his first good game, then the Roddy White owner will say, I'm keeping him, I've seen the worst of it, so I might as well hold on to him now. If you get Roddy White now, he should definitely help you in the end of the season. He's on a prolific passing offense, and you'll be able to get a large chunk of that offense if you pick him up now. The other values here are Greg Jennings. Greg Jennings just last week started to show what his real value is. He's the number one wide receiver on Minnesota. Minnesota, they have a great passing offense, or at least they did. And so now they're starting to show some of that again. And I think now would be a good time to pick up Greg Jennings. And so does Robo. So if we take a look down, now as a group, as a group, wide receivers and quarterbacks suffer from the same problem, that in that running backs are overvalued, and so as a position they tend to be undervalued. AJ Green here, is his RDP is much higher than his ADP, so if you have AJ Green, now would be a good time to dump him. Brandon Marshall likewise. All right, tight ends, defenses, and kickers. Probably not too much interest there. I'll take a quick look at the tight ends. The league that this covers gives value for long touchdowns and points for yardage, and so this may be different. If your league only offers points for touchdowns and not yardage as well, then your numbers are going to be a little different. But you can punch your information, your scoring setup into RoboCheat, and you'll get your own customized scoring sheet. As expected, Jimmy Graham is up top. Let's take a look right away down the Delta column. Brent Selleck. The numbers would say that Brent Selleck should be up there right now. Based upon Philadelphia's past history, he should be doing better. Of course, he's not, and that's why his ADP is so high. So you might want to pick up Brent Selleck. He's probably on waivers somewhere, and you can just pick him up, stash him on your bench. Things should turn around for Brent Selleck. So there's a good waiver pickup. The same is true for Ed Dixon. He's the number one tight end on Baltimore, and they've had better days in the past, and things have gone south. He's another one you might consider stashing. Oakland has a new tight end. You might consider picking him up and stashing him. The other things that you can do here, you can see there's the ADP for there's not a big delta for the ADP and the RDP for Jimmy Graham, but there is a little opening for Jason Witten. Maybe you can go after him in a trade. Rob Gronkowski, take a chance. There's a big delta. Rob Gronkowski owners are pretty frustrated right now, and you can probably trade. If you make a reasonable offer, you might be able to pick him up now and give the owner of Gronkowski points this week, and in return you get points for the rest of the season. And that's it. That's the moving week overview. Thank you very much. Please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Thank you very much.